Or just, Megan Mel time.
Oh my gosh, I know it's been so long. So actually, like I was thinking about this morning. It has actually been 10 years since we worked together. At this point, at this point, we have been friends outside of work 10 times longer than we actually worked together. But I feel like the trauma bonds that were formed in that 1 year were like so real. And then just I don't know, you've like always stayed in touch and like made sure to check on me and just be so thoughtful. And I've always cared about like what's going on with you. So it has just felt so natural, like spending the better part of our friendship and knowing ship like
Yes.
outside of the actual like traumatic 12 to 13 months that we spent together on
Agreed.
like one of the world's biggest brands. And we did like so much in 1 year, like launch a new brand, launch like three new websites. It was like
Yeah.
bananas.
Yeah.
Like when I say trauma bond, I'm not exaggerating at
I
all.
know. You know what's funny? Somebody somebody recently, I mean, when I say recently, it could have been in the last 3 years. What even is time anymore? But somebody was saying something about, like a facial filler or something, and I was like, "Okay, so we could talk about that, but just to let you know, like, I have experience with these brands and blah, blah, blah." And somebody was talking about, the visualization tool, like, with the slider.
Yeah.
Do you remember the slider? And I was just
Okay.
like, "No," I found myself feeling very twitchy. I was just like, "No, no, I don't
Yeah.
wanna talk about the visual slider." It was
Yeah.
very
We can't go there, sorry.
can't go there. No,
Oh
no.
my gosh. Well, I'm really, really grateful that you like even that you were the one that reached out with this idea. Like I am in this place of it's like I've 15 years I've committed my life to like marketing for other brands and now I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to start my own business." Like, "Oh, I have to do marketing for myself."
Yeah.
What the hell? But like you come through with this like freaking brilliant idea because obviously I've known that you made like a major pivot in your career from like super buttoned up like badass project manager to like the creative side of things. And I think for some of the folks that I work with that know nothing about like agency life, that is like culturally such a massive leap, but knowing you personally, it completely makes sense,
Yeah.
right? But it's funny, like when I was describing you the other day to somebody, and I'm like, okay, if I had to like choose my fighters, like Mortal Kombat style, okay, most of them would be creatives because creatives are like borderline crazy and like obviously super imaginative and like will come up with all kinds of like solutions. And there would be two PMs. There would be no technologists. Okay. But like two PMs, it would be my best friend Kat and it would be you. And then as I
I
was
love
thinking about it, I'm like, okay, this is an agency battle royale would not actually be like Mortal Kombat. It would be more like that scene from Anchorman where the newscasters are in the parking lot, like the
my
Ocho.
Yes. Yes, 100%. It's funny, I feel like we would need the technologists afterward, after the
Right.
battle, to make sure that the systems would be recreated and improved. Um,
Yeah. They're like, you made a mess. Let us fix this.
yes, exactly. First off, it is an honor. I would battle with you anytime.
Yeah.
I think that, what you were saying about making the big shift, the cultural shift between
Mm,
project management and going into being a creative professional is so it's so jarring. On paper, it doesn't really make sense, but it makes sense for me personally, just as you said, like, knowing
yeah,
me, it totally makes sense, but on paper, it
exactly.
looks like something that wouldn't work, but in practice, there are always some personal just characteristics and details that make things work or not, and in my
Right.
particular case, my details made it work.
Right. So I guess first, like, let's start with name, where you live,
Right.
where you're working.
But I am Melissa Thomas. I live in Brooklyn. I am a design director, and I spent the first half of my career in project management, and the second half up to this point as a creative professional.
And when did you make this change to your current role?
Yeah. So there were two shifts that I think led, two big ones that led to where I am now.
Okay.
I made the leap from project management to design work, to graphic design work,
Mhm.
being a creative for pay,
Right.
um, about 15 years ago, but I didn't do it on a
Mhm.
full-time scale.
Right.
So I started my career in project management, but I was a kid who really wanted to go to art school. I
Mhm.
grew up really loving art and design. Ever since my tiny brain could understand shape and color, I found it fascinating and inspiring. And so I wanted to go to art college. Fast forward to being in high school, and my parents, I understand, in an attempt to protect my future, explained that that was impractical. And as
Mm.
much as I tried to change their minds, they were the ones controlling the purse strings and basically said, it's nice that you want to go to art school, but you're not going to do that. You're going to go to a liberal arts college and get yourself a degree that will land you a job. They thought that a
Mhm.
degree in the arts meant that I would be unemployed and unemployable. It's not necessarily the case, but I understand why they made that decision, as fear-based as it was. So
Right.
so I was the
Right.
kid who was not allowed to go to art school, and
Mhm.
settled for, being a hobbyist, being
Yep.
a person who really appreciated what I appreciated on my own time. I was always in museums and galleries. I was keeping up on
Yep.
industry trends, and I was really interested in design. But I went very, I veered practical.
Mhm.
And so when I started my career in project management, it was in various industries. I worked in various industries. So project management A is project management B, but the details are different. There are
Mhm.
some exceptions to that rule. Technical project management is very different than, say,
Yep.
construction project management or creative project
Yep.
management, but there are some commonalities there. And so I started my career in the suburbs of DC, working in print production and fundraising project management,
Yep.
and eventually parlayed that into a role with Ralph Lauren in New York City. So I
Mhm.
would have taken a job, I don't know, working at the corner bodega if it got me to New York. It just
Yep.
happened to make it a lot easier that it was with a big brand that had a name that sort of made my parents and older adults in my life at the time, whose approval was important to me, more comfortable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think so many people can identify with that.
yeah, it's amazing how, I mean, just like full transparency, I'm 46. I have a lot of perspective on the decisions and the changes that I made in my life literally 20 years ago that brought me to New York. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't always look back at all of those decisions and the motivations for those decisions with fondness, but the
Mhm.
perspective is really helpful.
Yeah.
Uh, and now I've gotten to the point in my life through working with a very, very skilled counselor for 3 years that I don't look at those decisions with shame either, which is
There you
good.
go.
Yeah.
There you
So
go. You
that's
can appreciate how the path got you to where you are and still have hopeful, imaginative wishing that maybe the path had been a little bit different,
yes. Yes.
right? And that's a
Yes.
very tough place to get to. Like it takes a lot of work to get to that point, but then once you're there, hopefully you found that to actually be liberating to
Yeah.
to take off the shame coat that follows you everywhere, by the way.
Yes, it follows
Yeah.
everywhere, even when you're alone. You could be in a crowd of people or you could be alone. That shame code is
Mhm.
still gonna be hanging out.
Yep.
So yeah, it's interesting looking back now to 20 years ago, and seeing where I am. But the practical parts of project management that got me to New York, um, underpinned the first half of my career. So whether it was in print production,
Exactly.
whether it was in fundraising, whether it was in construction, um,
Mhm.
it didn't really matter. I was still doing the same kinds of work. Eventually, how you and I met was I got into healthcare and pharmaceutical advertising and marketing.
Right.
Um, and those positions, I worked for WebMD for the better part of 6 years.
I
Um,
forgot about that.
yeah, it's kind of crazy. I was on
Mhm.
the HCP side, so I was on the healthcare professional side, not the public facing consumer site.
Consumer side.
I was working on the other
Mhm.
side of it. But that meant that we were working with a lot of brands who maybe didn't have an external agency, and so we had kind of a de facto agency in-house at WebMD, and
Yep.
that's the portion that I worked in. And so working on those kinds of creative projects within the healthcare space meant that there was creative work to be done, but it had to be
Mhm.
very, very regimented and regulated and everything. I mean, you're very familiar with
Absolutely.
all of the regulatory reviews and legal reviews and all of that stuff. So it
Mhm.
was creative with a lot of guardrails.
Yeah.
Anytime you're working in a creative project, you have to manage the budget as the project manager. And inevitably, more often than I would care to admit, your burn rate means that by the time you have to make those last minute changes that no one was anticipating, which seem to happen on every project, why we just don't
Absolutely.
anticipate. But these changes would come in at the very last minute, and you needed to get this campaign in market. And without being able to make these changes, you can't launch.
Mhm.
I can hear my neighbor's kid out back. I don't know if you can hear him. He's
No, not at all.
making a lot of funny sounds. I have my window open. He's Leo.
Aw. No,
He's
I
a
can't hear.
great
That's so
time.
sweet though.
Okay. um, so the budget would be mostly gone by the time we had to make these last minute changes, and they were creative
Mm.
changes, either to an email or a suite of digital ads or a web
Yep.
page or whatever it may be. And I didn't have any money left for the creative work to be done. So who had to do
Mhm.
it? Well, it's either we don't launch, which is not an option, or I figure it out. And so I had been always sort of dabbling again, as I said, I put art and design in my hobbyist pocket. So I'd been
Yeah.
doing that on my own for fun, just for my own gratification. And so I knew a
Mhm.
bit about how to use the software, how to, but I taught myself how to code. I taught myself how to revise an art file. I taught myself, all of the I knew the any kind of print specs based on my print production project management. But I didn't
Mhm.
necessarily know how to manage those design files. And I learned. I taught myself. I learned everything new that I could possibly learn, and then
Yeah.
I became the person who was making those changes. It wasn't the best move from a project management standpoint, let's be honest. If you're a really great PM, you've managed your budget properly and you won't have any more changes because you'll be able to say to the client, "We've used up the budget." But
Mhm.
that wasn't always an option. And so I got to use this creative skill set, and the more I the more I had to and was also granted the opportunity to, I realized that that was the part of the business that I wanted to be focusing on. That was the part of the
Yep.
work that intrigued me and sparked me and made me feel like, I don't know, that I was more engaged in the work that I was doing.
Yeah. Not like
Oh,
numbing out just to get through the
not
day.
numbing out. Right,
Mhm.
exactly. And so on the side, on my own time, I took loads of online classes. I signed up for every webinar I could possibly. I mean, this was back in early days of webinars. I could
Mhm.
possibly get into. It was also the early days of when people were putting tutorials on YouTube and things like that. So
Yeah.
designers whose work I really admired, I would look at what their portfolio sites were doing. I would watch their content, and it gave me a lot of depth and breadth that I
Mhm.
would have gotten on my own had I been doing that work professionally.
Mhm. And I think a lot of people that are of the younger generation, like they can't remember that time when we were able to access learning and without having to pay a 1099 subscription fee or it being called a master class. It was a lot more organic access, where you could, like you said, I found someone that I admired their work and just for fun, they happened to piddle around on YouTube and I could watch them. And that is so different in even just the last 5 years.
Big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we're all kind of losing because of that,
Yeah.
honestly.
Before, so there's a platform, Skillshare. It
Hmm.
is a subscription based platform where you can learn skills from professionals doing this work. Um,
Hmm.
but n- not Skillshare TM, but the idea of sharing skills, the idea of skill
Yes.
sharing was what I was able to take advantage of. And I
Hmm.
very much value that experience. And I lament that that is gone a little bit.
It's so
Listen,
good.
there's still some of it that exists, right?
Yes.
But a lot of
You
the
got to
work,
like get past all the lead gen ads first, though.
absolutely. Oh
You
my
have
god.
to actually be committed to the intellectual exercise to like push through and find and discover. And I
Yeah.
think that there's a joy with discovery that like a lot of us unknowingly are circumventing because we want the quick answer. Well, I want to learn how to code in 48 hours, so I'm just going to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And I think that's different. And
It
the
is
other
different.
piece is the Skillshare that you're talking about, not the platform, but just the act. It's like a verb. Is my experience of you is that you are such a consummate learner that you're also willing to impart what you're learning with other people. So there's always like a sharing and collaboration with you. And I would imagine that that give and take is part of what fuels this curiosity that you have. That's always been my hypothesis because I know for a fact I learned a ton from you in 13 months.
Well, that is making me teary-eyed. I find that to
Oh,
be such a really wonderfully gratifying compliment. Thank you so much.
it's my
Um,
pleasure. It's the
feel
truth.
incredibly seen. Um, I think that collaboration is so important to me in my own particular life, and I am very anti-gatekeeping.
Mhm.
I am anti-gatekeeping in every possible way. I think that part of
Mhm.
it just comes from being a Gen Xer, part of it comes from being a woman, part of it comes
Mhm.
from being a parent, and part of it comes from being a person who switched career focus.
Mm.
And I think that if you know something and you have knowledge and skills, the only reason to hoard that is that you are coming from very much a scarcity mindset and you're afraid that somebody's going to try to take something from you.
Mm.
I just don't think that that is anything that applies to my life. I've never seen that borne out in practice, um,
Mhm.
unless we're talking about, random dudes stealing my ideas and basically passing them off as their own in meetings, because that's an
That's a
entire
different type of hurt.
subject. That's a different
That's
type
that is
because
a
stuff
different type
happens.
of hurt. No, I think that you were one of the first people that I heard say that you liked being around people that were better than you at stuff, and I remember that having a really big impact on me, and I can't remember if you're talking about me or someone else, but you were giving a very practical example of, like, why you needed that person in that meeting because they added so much value on something that was not your strength, and it was said so authentically that honestly I've never told you this, but it's like become my thing. Like that's I literally when I had the opportunity to lead a team of brilliant strategists who came from everything from like customer data to like email CRM, digital web design. I literally was like, I cannot be the expert of all this. I want you guys to know like I recognize that y'all are smarter than me. And it actually helped. So I learned that from you. And
Amazing.
I think that I think when people talk about the scarcity mindset, they don't understand that that's what you're giving up is that ability to connect with people and to deliver that type of quality work if you
Yes.
are living in that scarcity mindset. So that's why I wanted to focus on that for a minute.
Ah, I love that so much. I think that diversity is a major, bonus, strong suit, necessity, and
Mm,
diversity in pretty much everything. I don't wanna eat the same thing every day. I don't wanna be around the same people every day. I don't
yeah.
want to only have the same experiences day in and day out. That leads to a lot of stagnation, and diversity of thought, diversity of skill set, diversity of experience,
Yes.
quite frankly, diversity of talent is really important to me personally.
Yes.
Uh, Several years ago, a good friend of mine and I went through an exercise together where we listened to a great episode of the podcast Hidden Brain, and it was
Hmm.
about goal setting versus purpose understanding, right? So people
Yeah.
who live their lives in pursuit of goals tend to, not always, but tend to be disappointed along the way because it's either a
Hmm.
success or fail. It's either black or white, red or green. You either achieved it or you didn't. Whereas if you move along and progress with a sense of purpose, you know that you are inherently on the journey, not necessarily only getting to the destination. And
Wow.
yeah, and so she and I
Yes.
went through this thing, and I said to her, I can definitely see what your purpose is," and she was like, I don't know that I know it," and she goes, "But I definitely know what yours is," and I said, "Well, I don't know if I know what mine is," and so we went away for a few days, and we came back, and exactly what each of us landed on is what the other person saw so clearly, but we needed to just put it into words and articulate it,
Oh,
which was so cool. It was
What
really
an incredible process. Like, I feel like that is a number one tip and next step that needs to come out of this, like recommending to folks. A, to work that process with someone that you know and trust and that can see you. And
yes.
B, giving yourself permission to be inspired and then take the time to process and find the words. That is, I think so many of us, we struggle because we haven't yet found the words. And if we think that it's a problem that only we can solve, well, then we've lost that beautiful opportunity to connect in
Yes.
that process and to deepen our relationship with others and with ourselves. So that was really cool. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that.
of course. It was really, really enlightening. And
Hmm.
I feel like anytime I have a bit of an aha moment, I look back at it and I see that I knew that all along, but I wasn't able to articulate it. And this is
Yeah.
something that I've worked with my counselor on a lot, is that this concept that is sort of like an amorphous blob that I don't really have words for can be
Yes.
somehow threatening or can be easily
Yes.
misunderstood. And as soon as I put it into a paragraph, sometimes just a sentence, then I can understand it.
Yes.
You know, there is power in being able to say it.
Hmm.
And so through that exercise of coming up with what my purpose was, I realized that it's all about connection. For me, it's all about connection. It's about making connections, fostering environments where other people feel comfortable to make connections, bringing people together. It doesn't just mean professional networking. It means that I want to foster environments where people feel comfortable to make genuine connections. And that
Yes.
transfers into my work. And relationships have always been at the core of what I do. And so back to what we were talking about originally, where, you were saying the cultural shift between project management and being a creative pro is so vast, but on paper it doesn't look like it would work. Knowing me, it does make sense. It's
Yeah.
because the relationships that I build with people along the way are what has underpinned all of the work that I do, regardless of what the role that I'm filling is. And that
I
has to
love
do,
that.
it ties directly back to my purpose of really building and fostering connections. And understanding that about myself illuminated so many different things for me. And now I don't I don't fear change in the same way that I did
Sure.
before, because I understand that it isn't about success or failure.
Hmm.
It's fascinating. Fascinating.
Hmm.
So
Well, you've touched on themes of shame, you've touched on themes of value, identity, purpose, and there's been this long-held belief in the psychological field as well as with, consumers, which is that there's career counseling and then there's mental health counseling. And I
oh,
think your story, my story, I've been talking to several other like professionals and entrepreneurs who've made big changes. These things are so inextricably intertwined. Okay. Like, if work is not going well, your sex life is probably affected. If you're having a tough time in your marriage and you're questioning your identity, it's probably coming with you to work no matter how much you try to keep it together. Right. And that's just to be human. We
yes.
develop these compartmentalization skills to survive. It's adaptive, right? Like, you can't sit around crying and being like, I don't have my purpose for 25 to 70 years, right? So you
Right.
figure out how to put one foot in front of the next. But like, are there times where just acknowledging the vulnerability of that connection would actually help you move further? And that's what I feel like is so cool about what you did with your friend. To be able to say, we need to listen to this podcast together, which, by the way, hidden brain, like, add that to the list of tips for folks that are looking for inspiration, right?
Yes.
Just in general,
Yes.
and using connection to help fuel your path forward. One thing that I have done for myself, and I had to give myself permission on this because I was the every 3 to 5 years, very clear goals, and I accomplished them, but I feel miserable, right?
Yeah.
So as I decided to leave the agency leadership position that I was in for the last 8 years, people would be like, so what's the next step? And I said, you know what? I've spent the last 20 years having a very clear answer to that. And that's gotten me here. And I'm very proud. And I said, but I'm going to give you an answer that probably frustrates you. I don't know what my next step is. And I'm actually thrilled about it. I'm going to prioritize two things. Number one, I'm going to make space and time for people that I respect that are trying to live wholehearted lives, and I'm going to make sure that I'm spending more time with them. And then, and number two, I'm going to get really clear on doing things that align to my values. And I need to start being okay with being unlikable and saying no to things that don't match. And guess what? That means sacrificing pay,
It does.
right? And so that, I hate to say it, is like counterculture, because people are, I think a lot of us in the American culture, it's like, well, you need to make all of your money so that you can earn the right and create that nest egg enough to do those things. And I think people that are finding more joy and passion in their lives are the ones that are saying, like, screw it. I have to just be around people and things and work that make me feel like I matter and help clarify my purpose along the way.
Yes. Yes.
It
I
sounds
think
like you've been through so much of that.
absolutely. I think when I was younger, I definitely fell into the trap, and I do feel it's a trap of understanding, or at least having an eye toward the next 3 to 5 years goal, what that
Yeah.
needs to be, what the step needs to be, because I'm going to be it was phrased to us as a ladder. You climb the ladder.
Right. Like
I
beat into our brains.
It's beaten into our brains, and that implies serious hierarchy, and I've unsubscribed from that. I now instead of, the imagery of a ladder, I much prefer the imagery of a path.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's rocky, sometimes it's really smooth, sometimes it's uphill, sometimes it's down. But this idea that there is climbing up that needs to happen, and what that also implies is that anytime you have to come down the ladder, you're failing?
Mm.
That's the other part, is that the
Yeah.
ladder is rife with failure. This imbued idea of constant fear of failure. I don't want to make fear-based decisions for my life, and that means that I don't wanna make fear-based decisions for my work. They are
Mhm.
intertwined. I spend a lot of time at work. We spend a lot of time at work.
Yeah.
I don't want that part of my life to feel icky, to feel bad. I don't
Yeah.
want to, quite frankly, a lot of the times when we were working in healthcare and pharmaceutical advertising, I felt like I couldn't take a shower on the inside.
Yes.
You get home from a hard day wherever it is that you are making the widgets, the widget factory, you could take a shower and wash all of that off. But like,
Yeah.
I didn't always feel great about the brands that we were launching. I didn't always feel wonderful about the companies that were paying our agency to pay our paychecks. And so I'm not saying that all of the work that I do has to be some sort of like social justice forward, civil rights,
Mhm.
feel good work, but it can't all make me feel gross.
Right. Right. And when we also add in there, like, working until 2 and 3 in the morning, which we were, we
Yes.
had, like, a designated cry room that we, like, all decided we would go use to cry, right? Like, we were working with wonderful people. I still look back at that time, and I am in awe of the incredible minds that we, worked with. But I think you're right. Like, when all of those things start to intersect, we're losing sleep, we're, like, literally not the best version of ourselves. And then that affects your family.
Oh
It
yeah,
affects your child. It affects how you enjoy going to the museum that weekend,
that's
right?
right.
Like, because you're having to numb out in a way. And Brene Brown talks about this. If you are numbing out one aspect of your life, you are numbing out everything. So
Yep.
guess what? You have now, like, flatlined your joy levels as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Big time.
So
And I'm a person who operates with a relatively high joy baseline.
yeah, you do.
It just, I feel better when my level of enthusiasm is high. I don't
Mhm.
ever expect anyone to match my level of enthusiasm, but if you want to come along for a little bit, it's great.
Just a
And
little amuse bouche.
little, and so feeling that I need to work on getting my joy level back up because it's been so ground down in other parts of my life isn't something that I'm interested in pursuing anymore.
Right, because 'cause
Um,
you've worked so hard.
yeah. So
Wow.
switching from project management to graphic design, massive change. And then
Mhm.
the second big change, speaking of like not necessarily working toward a goal, but
Yeah.
living with a purpose. after working in graphic design for quite a number of years, I wanted to move to more of an art direction role. And that happened naturally with clients I was working with. Um just working with some really incredible creative directors who were saying like, I want you to ideate this entire thing, I want you to run it, as opposed to just doing the production graphic design of it. And
Yeah,
it happened naturally, but again, that's because of the connections, that's because of the relationships, and it's because of the fact
exactly.
that when you have a good relationship with, when you're good at what you do and you are eager and willing to do good work and to constantly
Mhm.
improve, and then you layer on top of that the fact that you do value relationships, it means that people are much more willing to think of you first when there's an
Yes.
opportunity.
Yes.
And so I, it feels to me, and I even just said it, these things happen naturally. They didn't happen naturally. They happen because of who I am, the choices I make, and the work that I do. I
Yes.
don't know how natural that is. It's the me that I have cultivated is what caused these things to happen, but it feels natural. So just putting that out there. Um, I was given opportunities to do more art direction work and I really loved it. I was still doing a lot of the design work. I still am doing a lot of the design work, but now I'm design
Mhm.
director and I run a team, and um, making that leap was really big for me. And what you said about wanting to be around people who are better at something than you,
Mhm.
um, that was what I went to first when I wanted to make the second leap. So the first leap was from PM to graphic design.
Yes.
The second leap was from graphic design to a higher level creative leadership role within that
Mhm.
function. And when I wanted to take that leap, I surrounded myself with art directors and creative directors whose work I respected. I asked them for portfolio reviews. And by the way, they were very happy to do it. Again, it's like the creators who were putting things on YouTube and sharing skills and knowledge back in the day when I was learning how to
Exactly.
do this stuff. There are a lot of people who will gatekeep and, they'll not want to share
Mhm.
their secret sauce, which is not so secret. But there are many, many more people who are willing to help and want to see other people succeed. And those are the people I asked. And so I asked for brutal honesty. I got feedback, actionable feedback on my portfolio. And these are people who hired people like me. So I knew that their input
Yes.
was valuable.
Yes, and that their standards were high and clear.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people have devalued the role of feedback as a source of inspiration. If you enter a feedback opportunity with defensiveness and a worry that your character or your worth as a human being is being critiqued, you've already missed. You've already missed a beautiful opportunity to gain some inspiration from someone that sees the world differently than you.
Yeah. Well, you're probably operating in an environment where you don't feel psychologically safe. So you're not comfortable asking for the feedback or receiving it.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
I led a big scarf workshop with my team earlier this year. Scarf framework of psychological safety is really fascinating and wonderful, and it's something that my team relies on and talks about a lot. We have
Well,
the
you know
most.
what? We should probably have another talk about that because I'm huge on the psychological safety piece. And I think a lot of people think they're doing it because they use the words and they don't realize, especially in, well, there's so many environments where creativity is required, but it's stifled.
Yes.
And I would love to pick your brain on that. So maybe we need to
Yeah.
find more time just on that topic.
Yeah. Our the team I work with now, I've worked with them for 2.5 years. I've never had better brainstorm sessions with people in my life.
I
The
love that.
vulnerability that is required in a brainstorm is very, very misunderstood and underestimated from people who don't do
Yes.
that kind of work. But to throw ideas out there is extremely vulnerable. You're putting out
Hmm.
bits of your brain for people to say yes or no. Um,
Yeah.
and you can only really do that effectively if you feel, if you really truly experience psychological safety, and the way
Yes.
that our team gels and understands that it is so much more than just a judgment free zone. It is a collaboration, and we value partnership and skill
Hmm.
sets, and different perspectives, that it creates this wonderful, beautiful environment for ideas to really come to fruition. It's incredible.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a minute left, so
I know.
I have one last question for you. If you
Yes.
think about 2013 Melissa, which is the Melissa that I got to work with, if you were to say anything to her,
What
what
would it
message would you deliver at this point? Yeah.
be? Dig deep and listen to the voice that you hear before you seek the voices of people outside yourself.
Hmm. I love that.
I based a lot of my transition to creative work on validation and approval from my partner. And if I
Mm.
would have listened to myself, I would have done it far earlier.
You are an incredible human being, Melissa Thomas.
Thank you, Megan.
Seriously, thank you so much. This was like the best conversation.